Clara lived in a small apartment on the quieter side of the city. She was a young woman in her mid-20s, kind at heart but also quite reserved. She worked at a local library, where she spent most of her days surrounded by books and the soft, rustling sound of pages turning. Clara loved her job, but life outside of work often felt empty. She did not have many friends in the building, and most evenings she returned home to the silence of her little kitchen and a single plate of food. Despite her quiet routine, Clara had a habit that made her different from the others in the building. She noticed people. While most residents hurried up and down the staircase, staring at their phones or keys, Clara often paused to see what was happening around her. She noticed the small things, like the boy in the second-floor apartment who always wore mismatched socks, or the couple on the third floor who argued every weekend and then made up the very next day. But the person she noticed the most was her elderly neighbor, Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris lived directly across the hallway. He was a tall man, though age had bent his shoulders slightly forward. His hair was white and his face carried deep lines, the kind that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. Every morning, Clara saw him sitting alone on his balcony with a simple cup of tea. He never had visitors, and no one in the building ever seemed to stop and talk to him. His door was always closed, his windows often dim, and the silence around him felt heavy. Clara often wondered about him. Did he have family? Did anyone come to check on him? Why did he always look so distant, as though he was waiting for something that never arrived? These questions circled in her mind, but she never had the courage to knock on his door. She told herself it was none of her business, yet her heart softened every time she saw his lonely figure. One evening, after a long day at work, Clara returned home with a small bag of groceries. She was tired, but she decided to cook a pot of stew, her mother's recipe filled with vegetables, potatoes, and a little chicken. As the smell filled her apartment, she remembered Mr. Harris. She thought of him sitting alone with his plain tea and perhaps a piece of bread, and a sudden thought came to her. Why not take him some food? At first she hesitated. What if he refused? What if he felt offended? Many older people had pride, and sometimes kindness felt like pity to them. But Clara's heart was stronger than her hesitation. She carefully filled a bowl, placed it on a tray, and stood in front of his door. For a moment she just stood there, listening to the silence inside. Then, taking a deep breath, she knocked softly. There was no response at first. She almost turned away. But then she heard the slow shuffle of footsteps. The door opened, and there stood Mr. Harris. His expression was confused, almost cautious, as if he hadn't had a visitor in years. "Yes?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Clara smiled nervously. "Good evening, Mr. Harris. I cooked a little too much tonight. Would you mind helping me finish it?" She held out the tray. For a moment he simply stared at it, his eyes narrowing slightly. His pride was there, standing tall between them. But Clara's smile was gentle, not forced. Finally, he let out a small sigh and said, "You shouldn't trouble yourself." "It's no trouble," Clara replied quickly. "Honestly, it would go to waste otherwise." There was a pause, then slowly he reached out and took the tray. His hands trembled slightly as he held it. "Thank you," he murmured, almost too softly to hear. Then he gave a little nod and closed the door. Clara returned to her apartment, her heart beating fast. She wondered if she had done the right thing. Maybe he thought she was strange. Maybe he wouldn't eat it. But the next evening, as she carried her own dinner plate to the table, she noticed something unusual. For the first time, the door across the hallway was slightly open, and she could hear faint humming coming from inside. The following day she repeated the gesture. Another plate, another gentle knock. This time Mr. Harris opened the door a little faster. He still looked cautious, but there was a hint of warmth in his eyes. "You cooked again?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said with a smile. "And again, too much?" He gave a small chuckle, his first laugh in a long time, and took the plate. "I see. Then I suppose I'll help you again." Day by day, this small routine continued. At first, they exchanged only a few words, but slowly their conversations grew. Clara learned that Mr. Harris was a widower. His wife had passed away years ago, and since then, his life had grown quieter and quieter. He had a son, but he rarely spoke of him, and Clara, sensing the pain behind his silence, never asked too much. Instead, they talked about simple things: the weather, the books Clara loved, the flowers Mr. Harris used to grow in his garden when he was younger. He began to share little stories from his past, and Clara listened with genuine interest. She found herself looking forward to those evening knocks as much as he did. What surprised Clara most was the change in him. When she had first seen him, he seemed like a shadow of a man, silent, withdrawn, almost invisible. But as days passed, his face softened, his eyes brightened, and sometimes she even heard him laugh from across the hall. The neighbors noticed too. "Mr. Harris looks different these days," someone whispered in the stairwell. What happened? No one knew the answer, but Clara did. She had not done anything extraordinary, just shared food and kindness. Yet it was enough to bring life back into a lonely man's world. One night, as she handed him his dinner, Mr. Harris paused and said something that touched her deeply. "You know, Clara," he said slowly, "for a long time, I thought the world had forgotten me. But then you knocked on my door. You may think it's just food, but it's more than that. It's company. It's kindness. And for an old man like me, that means everything." Clara's eyes grew warm with unshed tears. She didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled and replied, "I'm glad I knocked then." From that moment, their bond was sealed. Every evening meal was no longer just food. It was friendship. It was hope. And though Clara didn't yet realize it, this simple act of kindness was about to open a door to a story far bigger than she could ever imagine. Clara's routine of sharing meals with Mr. Harris had now turned into something much more than a simple act of kindness. It was no longer about finishing extra food. It had become about companionship. Every evening after returning from her job at the library, she found herself looking forward to the gentle knock on his door, the exchange of smiles, and the little conversations that followed. At first, Mr. Harris had been shy in speaking. He answered only in short sentences and kept his stories brief. But as days turned into weeks, Clara noticed him opening up more. He started to speak about his past, his interests, and even small details about his daily life. Clara, who had always enjoyed listening, found herself deeply interested in everything he shared. One evening, as she placed a plate of vegetable curry in his hands, he looked at her with a small twinkle in his eye. "Did you know," he said, "I used to have a garden bigger than this whole building's backyard? My wife loved roses. She would spend hours trimming them, watering them, and even talking to them. I used to laugh at her, saying flowers don't listen. But she believed they did. She said they bloomed better when spoken to with love." Clara smiled warmly. "I believe her. My mother used to say the same about her plants. She said kindness isn't just for people, even flowers can feel it." Mr. Harris chuckled softly. "Ah, you sound just like her. Maybe that's why I feel comfortable talking to you." Those words touched Clara's heart. She had always wondered why she felt such a strong pull toward helping him. Perhaps without realizing it, she had stepped into the role of a friend he desperately needed. Evening conversations. Their talks grew longer as time went on. Sometimes Mr. Harris would tell her about his childhood in a small village where life was simple but full of joy. He spoke about climbing trees, fishing in rivers, and running barefoot in fields. Other times, he shared memories of his wife, how they met, how she loved to sing while cooking, and how the house felt alive with her presence. Clara listened patiently, never interrupting, never rushing him. She noticed how his face changed when he spoke of his past. The wrinkles on his forehead softened, his eyes sparkled, and his voice carried warmth. One night, Clara asked him, "Do you ever feel lonely, Mr. Harris?" He paused for a long moment, then sighed. "Lonely? Every day, Clara. After my wife passed, this apartment felt like a cage. The walls don't talk, the rooms don't laugh. I thought silence would be my only companion until the end of my life." Clara's chest tightened. She couldn't imagine such emptiness. She gently placed her hand on his arm and said, "But you're not alone now. I'm here, and I'll keep coming." For the first time, she saw his eyes glisten with unspoken gratitude. He didn't reply, but the way he looked at her said more than words ever could. A change in the building. It wasn't long before the other neighbors began to notice a difference in Mr. Harris. The man who had once been silent and withdrawn now greeted people when he passed them in the hall. He even started sitting outside on the building's shared bench, nodding politely to those who walked by. Some were surprised, others were curious, but nobody could deny that something in him had changed. Clara overheard two women whispering in the stairwell one day. "Have you seen Mr. Harris lately?" one asked. "Yes," the other replied. "He looks so much healthier. I wonder what happened." Clara smiled quietly to herself but said nothing. She knew what had happened. Kindness had happened. Small gifts of friendship as their bond grew, Mr. Harris began to return Clara's kindness in small but meaningful ways. One evening when Clara brought him dinner, he handed her a small notebook. "I used to write poems when I was younger," he said shyly. "They're not very good, but I thought maybe you'd like to read them." Clara's eyes lit up. "Poems. I love poems. I'll treasure this." She spent that night reading through his faded handwriting. The poems were simple, filled with love for his wife, admiration for nature, and quiet reflections on life. They weren't perfect, but they were honest and beautiful in their own way. The next day she returned the notebook and said, "Your words are wonderful. You have a gift, Mr. Harris. Why did you stop writing?" He smiled sadly. "After my wife passed, the words stopped coming. But maybe one day they'll return." Clara encouraged him gently. "They will. Sometimes the heart just needs a reason to write again." From that day, Mr. Harris began writing once more. At first, just small lines, but slowly, his notebook began to fill again. Clara often read his poems, and together, they laughed at the imperfect rhymes or smiled at the touching verses, shared meals, shared hearts. Their friendship also began to extend beyond dinner plates. One weekend, Clara invited Mr. Harris to join her for lunch in her apartment. At first he refused politely, saying, "I don't want to intrude," but Clara insisted. "You're not intruding. You're my guest." Finally he agreed. That afternoon he sat at her small kitchen table while she served him rice and vegetables. For the first time in years his meal was shared across a table with someone who cared. They laughed over small things, and Clara realized how much lighter the air felt with him there. The more they shared meals, the more Clara began to see Mr. Harris not just as a neighbor, but as family. She had never had a grandfather in her life, and in many ways he filled that space in her heart. Similarly, Mr. Harris seemed to find in Clara the daughterly affection he had long missed. The photograph one rainy afternoon, Clara brought over hot soup. As she entered his apartment, she noticed Mr. Harris holding a framed photograph. It was of a young man, tall and confident, standing beside a car. Clara hesitated, then asked softly, "Is that your son?" Mr. Harris's eyes grew distant. "Yes, his name is Daniel. He left many years ago to build his life. We haven't spoken much since. He was ambitious, always dreaming big. I wanted him to stay close, but he wanted the world. Our paths grew apart." Clara didn't ask why. She could see the pain in his expression. Instead, she said gently, "He must love you even if distance came between you." Mr. Harris sighed deeply. "Perhaps, but sometimes love is quiet. Too quiet." Clara placed the soup on the table and spoke kindly. "You never know, Mr. Harris. Life has strange ways of bringing people back together." He gave her a small, hopeful smile, though his eyes still carried a shadow of doubt. The bond beyond food weeks passed, and the friendship between Clara and Mr. Harris only grew stronger. Their evenings became the brightest part of both their days. What had begun as simple meals turned into long conversations, laughter, and shared memories. Mr. Harris began to tell her, "I feel alive again, Clara. Before you, I was just existing. Now, I feel like I'm living." Clara felt the same. She realized that helping him had given her own life new meaning. She no longer returned to an empty apartment. Her evenings were filled with purpose, joy, and connection. It was no longer just about feeding a lonely neighbor. It was about filling an empty heart with kindness, companionship, and care. And though Clara could not yet see what the future held, her small act of kindness was slowly weaving a story far greater than she had imagined. A story that would soon connect her life to places and people she never dreamed of. The bond between Clara and Mr. Harris had become the highlight of their days. Each evening was no longer just about food. It was about stories, laughter, and the comfort of knowing someone cared. But one rainy afternoon changed something in their friendship. It was the day Clara discovered a part of Mr. Harris's life that he had carefully kept hidden. The photograph by the window. It was a gray and rainy day when Clara knocked on Mr. Harris's door with a pot of warm soup. Usually he opened the door quickly, eager to welcome her smile. But this time it took longer. Clara waited, hearing faint footsteps from inside. Finally, the door opened and Mr. Harris stood there holding a small frame in his trembling hands. Clara," he said softly, almost absent-mindedly. His eyes weren't focused on her, but on the photograph he clutched tightly. Clara stepped inside and noticed the picture. It was of a young man, tall, well-dressed, standing proudly beside a shining car. His smile was confident, his eyes bright with ambition. Clara asked gently, "Is that your son?" Mr. Harris's face changed. His usual warmth gave way to something heavier, an expression filled with both pride and sorrow. He slowly nodded. "Yes, that is Daniel, my boy, my only son." Clara placed the soup on the table and sat down quietly. She didn't want to push, but she could see that Mr. Harris needed to speak. "A father's memories, Mr." Harris set the photograph on the table and sat beside it, his hands folded in front of him. For a long moment he just stared at the picture, as if searching for something he had lost years ago. "Daniel was always clever," he began. "Even as a child, he dreamed bigger than anyone else. While other boys were playing with sticks, he was drawing buildings, cars, and machines. He wanted to change the world. I admired that about him, but I was afraid too." Clara listened closely, her eyes fixed on the old man. "I wanted a simple life," Mr. Harris continued. "I worked at a small company, lived in this modest home, and thought that was enough. But Daniel, he wanted the city lights, the tall towers, the fast life. He studied hard, won scholarships, and moved away. I was proud, yes, but I was also scared I would lose him." His voice cracked slightly, and maybe I did. The silence between them, Clara spoke softly. "Did you fight with him?" Mr. Harris nodded slowly. "Yes, many times. I told him he was chasing dreams that would only bring him loneliness. He told me I was stuck in the past, too afraid to see the future." Our words grew sharp. Then one day he left. He said, "Father, I will build my life, and when I succeed, maybe you will understand me." He sighed deeply, his shoulders heavy with regret. I thought he would come back, at least for his mother. But when she passed away, he didn't. He sent flowers, but he didn't come. That hurt me more than I can say. Clara's heart ached as she listened. She could feel the weight of years of silence pressing on the old man's heart. "Do you speak with him now?" she asked gently. Mr. Harris shook his head. "No, it has been many years. Sometimes I see his name in the news. He is successful, very successful. He built companies, wealth, and fame. But all that success feels so far from me. I wonder if he remembers me at all." Clara's gentle encouragement. Clara sat in silence for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she said softly, "Mr. Harris, love doesn't disappear so easily. Even if he is far away, I'm sure he thinks of you. Maybe he doesn't know how to come back. Sometimes people wait for a reason, a small sign to return." Mr. Harris gave a sad smile. "You speak with so much hope, Clara. But I am old. I do not expect miracles now." Clara reached out and touched his hand gently. "You may not expect them, but sometimes life surprises us. You gave him love when he was young. That love doesn't vanish. It stays inside, waiting for the right moment." The old man's eyes softened, but he said nothing more. He simply placed the photograph back on the shelf, as if hiding away his pain once again. The hidden letters, a few days later. As Clara was helping Mr. Harris tidy his small apartment, she noticed a drawer filled with envelopes. Some were old and faded, others newer but unopened. They all had the same handwriting, Daniel's. Clara looked at him with surprise. "These are from your son?" Mr. Harris nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, he used to write often, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. Every time I looked at his handwriting, my heart grew heavy. I was angry that he wasn't here when his mother needed him, angry that he left me alone. So I left them unopened." Clara hesitated, then asked softly, "Do you want me to read one to you?" For a moment, Mr. Harris looked torn between pride and longing. Finally, he gave a small nod. Just one. Clara opened the most recent envelope and began to read. A son's words. The letter was simple, but every word carried emotion. Dear Father, I know we haven't spoken in a long time. I miss you. I know I disappointed you and I wish I could change that, but I hope you are well. I think of you often, more than you might believe. Please write back when you can. With love, Daniel. As Clara finished, she looked up. Tears were rolling silently down Mr. Harris's cheeks. His voice broke as he whispered, all this time. I thought he forgot me, but he didn't. Clara's own eyes grew moist. He never forgot, Mr. Harris. He was waiting for you just like you were waiting for him. The old man buried his face in his hands. Years of silence, regret, and pride seemed to pour out in that moment. Clara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. A new hope. That evening, something shifted in Mr. Harris. He no longer spoke of his son with bitterness, but with quiet longing. He began to wonder aloud what Daniel was doing, where he was living, whether he was happy. Clara encouraged him to write back. You don't have to say much, she told him. Just a small note, a few words. It could mean the world to him. At first, Mr. Harris resisted. His pride still stood tall. But slowly, with Clara's encouragement, he picked up a pen and wrote, Dear Daniel, I received your letters. Thank you, I am well. I hope you are too. Father, it was short, almost too short, but it was a beginning. Clara smiled and said, That's enough for now. What matters is that you reached out. The change in his eyes over the next days, Clara noticed a new light in Mr. Harris's eyes. He seemed less burdened, more hopeful. He still enjoyed her meals, still shared stories, but now there was something else, an unspoken anticipation. Perhaps after years of silence, the bond between father and son was not broken after all. One evening, as Clara was leaving his apartment, he stopped her. Clara, he said softly, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't knocked on my door that first night. You brought me back to life. You gave me courage to face the past. For that I thank you. Clara smiled warmly. You don't need to thank me, Mr. Harris. This is what friends do. But deep inside, she knew it was more than friendship. It was destiny, that their lives had crossed at just the right moment, allowing her kindness to heal an old wound. The letter Mr. Harris had written to his son was small, almost too simple, but it carried years of unspoken emotions. Clara had helped him post it, and now both of them waited silently for a reply. Days passed, then weeks. Mr. Harris pretended to be patient, but Clara could see the way his eyes lingered on the mailbox every morning, the way his footsteps slowed near the front entrance of the building, as if he hoped a letter might be waiting. Clara, too, felt a quiet anticipation. She wished for Mr. Harris to find peace with his son. She hoped Daniel would write back, or better yet, come visit. But she knew hopes like that sometimes took time. Then one evening, something happened that neither of them had expected. A car in the rain. It was a cold evening, the kind of night when the air smelled of wet earth and the streetlights reflected off the puddles. Clara was carrying a tray of food to Mr. Harris's apartment when she noticed a sleek black car pull up outside the building. It wasn't like the usual cars that parked there. It was larger, polished, and expensive. A tall man stepped out. He wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly, and his movements carried an air of quiet confidence. Even from a distance, Clara could sense something different about him, something that set him apart from the ordinary passers-by. Her steps slowed as she watched him look around, his eyes scanning the building with an expression that was both nervous and determined. Finally, he walked toward the entrance. Clara held her breath. Inside the building, the man climbed the stairs, each step echoing in the hallway. Clara followed behind, her heart strangely racing. She saw him stop at Mr. Harris's door and raise his hand to knock. At that very moment, Clara reached the same hallway with her tray. She froze, staring at the man's face. It was the same face she had seen in the photograph, the young man beside the car. Only now he was older, sharper, and more refined. This was Daniel, father and son Mr. Harris opened the door slowly, as he always did. But when his eyes landed on the man standing before him, his whole body went rigid. For a long moment, silence filled the hallway. Dad, the man said, his voice breaking slightly. It's me, Daniel. Mr. Harris gripped the edge of the doorframe as if to steady himself. His lips parted, but no words came. Finally, in a trembling voice, he whispered, Daniel. My son. Daniel's eyes glistened. Without waiting another moment, he stepped forward and embraced his father. The old man stiffened at first, but then his arms slowly rose to hold his son tightly as though afraid he might disappear again. Clara stood frozen, tears forming in her own eyes. She felt as though she was witnessing a miracle. The first conversation. They sat together inside the apartment, while Clara quietly placed the tray of food on the table. She didn't want to intrude, but Mr. Harris insisted she stay. "This is Clara," he said to his son, his voice filled with emotion. She has been my angel. She's fed me, cared for me, kept me company when I was alone. Without her, I don't know what would have happened." Daniel turned to Clara with deep gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you." "I don't have words. You did what I should have done. You looked after my father when I was too far away. I will never forget that." Clara smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me. He is family to me now." Daniel turned back to his father. "I wanted to come earlier, Dad. I wrote letters so many, but I never knew if you read them. When you finally replied, even just a few words, I knew I had to come. I didn't want to waste another day." Mr. Harris's eyes filled with tears again. "I was foolish, Daniel. I was angry. I let pride keep me from you. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a moment." Daniel took his father's hand. "And I never stopped loving you. I thought you didn't want me anymore. I thought I had failed you." For the first time in years, father and son spoke openly, their words carrying all the pain, regret, and longing they had buried for so long. Clara sat quietly, her heart swelling as she watched the broken bridge between them slowly being rebuilt. A revelation, as the evening went on, Clara realized something about Daniel. She had seen his face before, not just in the photograph, but in magazines and on television screens displayed in shop windows. She remembered suddenly. Daniel Harris, the billionaire entrepreneur. His name had appeared many times in articles about business and success. He was known for building companies that shaped industries. People admired him, envied him, spoke of him as a man who had everything. And yet, here he was, sitting with his father in a small apartment, his eyes filled not with pride, but with humility and longing. Clara realized then that behind all the wealth and fame, Daniel was simply a son who wanted to reconnect with his father. Shared dinner. Clara served the food she had brought, and the three of them sat together at the table. For Mr. Harris, it was the first time in many years that he had eaten a meal with his son beside him. They ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the moment itself. Daniel asked about his father's health, his days, his routines. Mr. Harris listened as Daniel shared stories of his journey, how he had struggled in the beginning, how many nights he had gone hungry while building his dream, how he sometimes thought of coming back but didn't know how to face the silence between them. "It wasn't the success that mattered," Daniel admitted quietly. "It was the thought of making you proud. But somewhere along the way I lost the courage to return." Mr. Harris reached across the table and placed his hand over his son's. "I am proud of you, Daniel. Always have been. Success or no success, you are my son. That is all that matters." Clara watched them, her heart full. She thought of all the evenings when Mr. Harris had sat alone, staring into nothingness, and how different this night was. The emptiness had been replaced with warmth, and the silence had been filled with voices that belonged together. A promise. Before leaving that night, Daniel stood by the door with his father. "I won't disappear again, Dad, I promise. I have missed too many years already. I want to make up for them every single day." Mr. Harris nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "That's all I ever wanted, Daniel. Not money, not success, just you." They embraced once more, and Clara quietly stepped aside, giving them the space they needed. As Daniel turned to her, he said softly, "Thank you, Clara. You didn't just feed my father, you brought him back to life. And because of you, I found the courage to return." Clara smiled. "Sometimes small kindness can open big doors. I'm just glad you're here." The night Daniel visited his father for the first time in years changed everything inside the small apartment building. For Mr. Harris, it was like the weight of a lifetime had been lifted. For Clara, it was like watching a story unfold, a story she never expected to be a part of. And for Daniel, it was the beginning of a promise he intended to keep. A new routine. After that night, Daniel began visiting often. His sleek car became a familiar sight outside the building. At first, the neighbors whispered with curiosity. Some wondered who the wealthy visitor was. Others stared in awe at his expensive clothes and confident manner. But Clara knew the truth. Behind all the success and wealth, Daniel was simply a son who wanted to spend time with his father. Every evening, Daniel joined them for dinner. Sometimes Clara cooked. Sometimes Daniel brought food from fancy restaurants, but the three of them always sat together. The meals were filled with laughter, stories, and moments that stitched the broken years back together. Mr. Harris seemed younger somehow. His steps grew steadier, his smile brighter. The loneliness that once shadowed his eyes was replaced with warmth. Clara often found herself smiling quietly as she watched father and son tease each other, argue playfully, and share inside jokes. For her, it was enough to see Mr. Harris happy again. She never expected anything in return. Daniel's curiosity one evening, as they cleared the table, Daniel turned to Clara. "Clara," he said seriously, "I want to know more about you. My father tells me how much you've done for him, how you saved him from loneliness, but you never talk about yourself. What are your dreams?" Clara hesitated, embarrassed. "Oh, I don't really have big dreams like you. I just work at the library. I like books and I like helping people. That's enough for me." Daniel shook his head. "No, that's not enough. Everyone has a dream. Maybe it's hidden, maybe it's small, but it's still there. What do you wish for deep inside?" Clara thought for a moment. She had never spoken of this to anyone, but the words slipped out softly. "I've always wanted to open a small reading center for children, a place where kids can come after school, read, learn, and feel safe. But it's just a dream. I don't have the money or resources for something like that." Daniel's eyes lit up. "That's not impossible." "That's a beautiful idea," Clara laughed nervously. "It's too big for someone like me." But Daniel didn't laugh. His expression was thoughtful, almost determined. A surprise plan. A few weeks later, Daniel called Clara and his father to join him for a drive. At first, Clara resisted. "Oh no, I'm not used to fancy cars and trips." "You go ahead." But Daniel insisted and Mr. Harris agreed. "Come along, Clara, it will be good for us." Reluctantly, she agreed. The car ride was quiet at first, but soon Daniel began speaking excitedly about plans, projects, and ideas. Clara didn't understand much. Business talk was foreign to her, but she listened politely. Finally, the car stopped in front of a small, unused building on the edge of the town. The windows were dusty, the signboard faded, but the structure was solid. Daniel turned to Clara with a smile. "Do you know what this is going to be?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "This," Daniel said proudly, "will be your reading center." Clara gasped. "What? No, Daniel. I can't accept this. It's too much." "I never asked for this," Daniel smiled gently. "You didn't have to ask. You cared for my father when no one else did. You gave him love when I wasn't there. This is not payment, it's gratitude. And it's also an investment in something beautiful. Children need places like this. You dreamed of it, Clara, and now we'll make it real." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She shook her head in disbelief. "I don't know what to say." Mr. Harris placed his hand on hers and said softly, "Say yes, Clara. You deserve this." The reading center months passed and Clara's dream slowly came alive. With Daniel's help, the building was cleaned, painted, and filled with shelves of books. Bright rugs were spread on the floors. Small chairs and tables were placed neatly, and colorful posters decorated the walls. Clara chose every detail with love, and Daniel supported her without hesitation. The day the center opened, children from all over the neighborhood poured in. Their laughter filled the rooms. Their little hands grabbed books eagerly, and their curious eyes lit up with excitement. Clara watched them with joy. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. Daniel stood beside her, smiling. "See? I told you it wasn't impossible." Mr. Harris sat on a chair near the window watching the children run around. His heart swelled with pride, not only for his son's success but also for Clara's kindness, which had created this beautiful place. A bond of family in time. The three of them became inseparable. Daniel continued to run his businesses, but he always returned to his father, making sure no day was wasted. Clara became the heart of the reading center, loved by children and parents alike, and Mr. Harris found peace in his final years, surrounded by love, laughter, and the family he thought he had lost. One evening, as they all sat together at the center after closing, Mr. Harris spoke softly. You know, life is strange. I spent years thinking I was forgotten. Then Clara knocked on my door with a simple plate of food. That one small act changed everything. It brought me my son back, and it gave Clara her dream. Kindness, even the smallest kind, has power we cannot imagine. Clara smiled, her eyes moist. Daniel nodded firmly. You're right, Dad, and I promise you I will never let this family break apart again. The lasting reward as time went on, Clara never thought of herself as a hero. She continued to live simply, working at the center, helping children, and spending evenings with Mr. Harris and Daniel. But in her heart she carried a quiet truth. Her kindness had not only fed a lonely man, but it had also rebuilt a family and created a future for countless children. Daniel often told her, "You think you gave my father food, but you gave him life. And in return you gave me back my family. I will always be grateful for that." And though Clara never sought any reward, she discovered the greatest reward of all: love, family, and the joy of knowing that her kindness had left a mark on the world. Closing of the story years later. Whenever children laughed in the reading center, or whenever neighbors spoke of the man who once sat alone but was now surrounded by warmth, Clara thought back to that first night, the night she had knocked on Mr. Harris's door with a simple plate of stew. She realized then that sometimes the smallest actions create the biggest changes. Sometimes one kind choice can rewrite an entire story, and so, the story of Clara, Mr. Harris, and Daniel was not a tale of wealth or success, but of kindness, the kind that turns strangers into family and loneliness into love.